In the searing heat of the Amazonian lowlands, Lope de Aguirre adjusted the battered helmet on his head and peered into the unending green labyrinth that lay ahead. The year was 1561, and Aguirre, once a loyal conquistador of the Spanish crown, now stood on the cusp of rebellion and madness. His small force of soldiers, desperate and ravaged by disease, hunger, and distrust, waited behind him, their armor stained with mud and blood, their eyes hollowed by fear. They had come in search of El Dorado, the fabled city of gold that promised untold riches and eternal glory. The legend had ignited a fever among the Spaniards, a madness that promised salvation from the failures and debts that had followed them across the Atlantic. Months of hacking through dense jungle, navigating treacherous rivers, and fighting off hostile tribes had stripped them of hope. Their original commander, Pedro de Ursua, had tried to maintain discipline, to cling to the king's authority in a land that refused to be ruled. But Aguirre, restless and furious at the leadership's incompetence, orchestrated a mutiny. The coup was swift and merciless. Ursua was arrested, stripped of command, and later executed under Aguirre's orders. Ursua's lover, Inés de Atienza, pleaded for her life, but her cries were swallowed by the jungle. From that moment, Aguirre assumed control, not just of the expedition but, in his mind, of their destinies. The feverish jungle seemed to whisper to him, fueling his visions of empire. His men, at first uneasy, gradually fell into grim obedience, bound by fear more than loyalty. The jungle closed in tighter with each passing day. Fever haunted their ranks, food grew scarce, and the river became a winding, treacherous artery through the endless green. Paranoia gnawed at Aguirre. He trusted no one. His cold eyes missed nothing. Whispered conversations could mean conspiracy. A sidelong glance might hint at treason. Soon he began to execute men he suspected of disloyalty, sometimes without proof, often without trial. The air around him thickened with the stench of death and fear. Among his followers was his own daughter, Elvira. She had journeyed with him, a rare sight among hardened soldiers, and was a living symbol of Aguirre's divided soul. Elvira was said to be beautiful and dignified, her presence like a ghost of the world they had left behind. Aguirre kept her close, whether out of genuine love or the need for some fragile tether to his former humanity, none could say. Some whispered darker suspicions that Aguirre intended to use her to found a dynasty of his own blood. Driven by a delusion of grandeur, Aguirre composed a letter to King Philip II of Spain, denouncing his rule and declaring his own sovereignty over Peru and all lands I may conquer. He signed it not as a humble servant, but as Lope de Aguirre, the wrath of God, Prince of Freedom, and King of Tierra Firma. It was treason of the highest order, a declaration not just of rebellion, but of divine right. There was no turning back. Their battered brigantines drifted along the swelling rivers, plagued by insects, hunger, and invisible enemies lurking in the trees. Every so often, Aguirre would order the slaughter of villages they passed, seizing food and captives to fuel their doomed march. Fear and rage were the only currencies left to him. His army, if it could still be called that, shrank by the day, not just from battle but from starvation, disease, and assassination. Aguirre responded with a reign of terror, executing men for imagined betrayals, until only the most terrified or fanatically loyal remained. At times, Aguirre's paranoia turned on the native captives who had been forced to guide the expedition. He accused them of sabotage, of leading them in circles. Punishments were brutal and public, a macabre theater of dominance in a world slipping through his fingers. The riverbanks grew quiet at their approach. Even the jungle seemed to hold its breath. As they traveled deeper into the unforgiving heart of the continent, the environment itself seemed to conspire against them. Torrential rains transformed trails into rivers of mud. Venomous creatures infested their camps. The jungle devoured men who strayed from the group, their screams fading into the endless green. Every night, fires flickered against a suffocating darkness, and every morning fewer men rose to march. Starvation drove some to madness. There were tales of men tearing apart carcasses of animals long dead, of cannibalism whispered in horrified tones. Aguirre, sensing the growing despair, tightened his grip. He promised them that glory was close, that El Dorado waited just beyond the next bend of the river. His words had the ring of prophecy, and for a time, they pressed on, carried by a desperate faith. Some survivors later spoke of Aguirre's hypnotic power, the way he could convince starving, fevered men to follow him through hell itself. Yet even that spell could not hold forever. Murmurs of revolt began to stir among the dwindling ranks. Aguirre struck swiftly, executing suspected traitors before plots could take shape. Blood soaked the decks of their boats, and the river carried their bodies away. The journey's horrors deepened as Aguirre led his men into unknown territories, regions unmarked on any map, where the rivers twisted like serpents through lands inhabited by tribes who viewed the Spaniards with open hostility. Skirmishes erupted regularly. Arrows whistled from unseen ambushes. Poisoned darts claimed more lives. Aguirre's forces dwindled, yet his determination only hardened. In desperate attempts to replenish their numbers, Aguirre ordered the capture of indigenous people, forcing them into servitude. These unwilling allies often sabotaged the expedition from within, disappearing into the night or leading Aguirre's men into ambushes. Aguirre responded with unspeakable cruelty, meting out punishments that only deepened the cycle of fear and hatred. Still, he pressed onward, haunted by visions of golden cities shimmering beyond the mist. His men began to see hallucinations as well, fever dreams of towering temples and streets paved in gold. Reality and madness blurred, until the expedition resembled less an army and more a damned procession marching into oblivion. At Barquisimeto, a colonial town now within reach, Aguirre's madness reached its peak. News of his rebellion had spread, and Spanish authorities had sent forces to capture him. Aguirre, feeling the noose tighten, turned inward, his mind a labyrinth of suspicion and dread. Believing that his daughter Elvira might be used against him, that she might be captured, humiliated, or turned into a symbol of his defeat, Aguirre made the most horrifying decision of his life. In a chilling act of twisted love or sheer madness, he killed Elvira with his own hands. Witnesses later said she did not resist, that perhaps she had long understood that death was the only freedom left to her. Her death broke whatever remnants of humanity Aguirre still possessed. With Elvira gone, Aguirre became a specter of vengeance, a hollow man driven only by the echoes of his rage. The Spanish forces closed in, encircling Barquisimeto with overwhelming numbers. Aguirre's followers, broken in spirit and body, abandoned him, choosing mercy and survival over loyalty to a madman. Left with only a handful of loyalists, Aguirre fought to the bitter end. The final confrontation was quick and brutal. Aguirre was captured, his body weakened but his spirit unbroken. Even in chains, he cursed the Spanish king, cursed the traitors among his men, and swore that his spirit would haunt the empire that betrayed him. His execution was swift. He was shot, dismembered, and his remains displayed in the plaza of Barquisimeto as a warning to any who might dream of rebellion. His name, however, could not be erased. Lope de Aguirre's journey had begun as a quest for gold and glory, but ended in madness, betrayal, and death. Yet his legend lived on, not merely as a cautionary tale, but as a haunting reminder of the thin line between ambition and ruin, between dreams of empire and the abyss that swallows them. In the centuries that followed, Aguirre's name would echo through history, whispered in the shadows of conquest and colonial ambition. His story inspired songs, plays, and novels, each retelling capturing a fragment of the man who once dared to challenge an empire and paid the ultimate price. Even now, in the deep, forgotten reaches of the Amazon, some say his ghost wanders the rivers, a restless spirit searching for the city of gold that never was. And when the jungle winds howl through the empty trees, It is said that one can still hear the desperate cries of men lost to madness, driven onward by the wrath of Lope de Aguirre,